note there isn't a mistake in the graph. In 2023, Anno Domini, walking unironically with the Stalin banner still happens. Just in Moldova. I've looked through footage from May the 9th events from as many places in the former USSR that I could find for this year. None featured walking down the street unironically with the Stalin banner. Well, in this case, walking up the street, actually. Now, if the intent is to mock, I could just show you variations of this craziness without further context. That wouldn't be a lie, but it would be misleading, since countless random people who happened to be on the sidelines of the streets these loons went through expressed visible or less visible disapproval. Here's an example of a very visible one. On the other hand, the pro-Western government, which was at the time in full preparation for the European Political Community Summit, pretended this didn't happen. And various pro-Western, or at the very least non-Vatnik commentators dismissed this manifestation as nothing more than a political play by the two pro-Russian parties. Technically, that's not a lie, but it's also misleading because it's not just that. These so-called Victory Day parades had died 30 years ago, and then at some point got revived, yes, for political plays, but stayed relatively small. I've been attending most of them over the last 10 years, and this was the largest one I attended to. So yes, it's a political play by the socialists, but it's a bit more of something else too. There's good news and there's bad news about this, though to be fair, it's mostly good news. The information space in Moldova and its little islands. That's the topic. Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Freedom Alternative. So, first, a little propaganda lesson for you, or an example more than a lesson. Propaganda as a notion gets a bad reputation, but it's really just a fact of life in storytelling, and it all depends on framing. So, only looking at this footage and using the fact that on May the 9th, 2023, nobody in the world marched with a Stalin picture on the streets except these loons in Moldova, I could tell you about how Moldova's informational space is an island of imbeciles and ignorance, or how the society is truly divided, as Deutsche Welle editorialist Vitalie Călugăreanu actually did, much to my amusement but also astonishment. Someone as experienced as Mr. Călugăreanu should know better. Moreover, if I show you this pro-Ukraine march from May the 8th, 2023 and keep on contrasting it with the disgusting spectacle from the next day, there you go. It's enough to convince the majority of the unsuspecting public that indeed Moldova is an island of Soviet holdouts. To underscore the point, I could emphasize the number of children at this parade, of course without telling you that most of the kids are in fact part of the few families of oligarchs and Russian-paid politicians. And maybe end with this nice little interview from Bălți.
Нам Европа не нужна. Что нам Европа даст? Вот вы скажите, что нам даст Европа?
Вы хотите, чтобы Молдова дружила с Россией?
Конечно, а мы дружили с Россией. Что, разве плохо мы дружили? Все было, и газ, и нефть, все было у нас. И жили нормально же.
Наверное, ближе к России.
Почему?
Но мы помним, как было в советское время, когда были объединены все страны СССР. Тогда было лучше.
Ouch. Conversely, I could show you footage from the regime-organized so-called Great National Assembly, which was really just a campaign rally. If I pick the correct angles, it won't even be noticed that it wasn't as big as advertised, and using speeches from this manifestation, which was, after all, better organized, longer lasting, and quite frankly far more entertaining than the Russian one, then I can credibly paint an entirely different picture without telling a single lie. To underscore the point, I could even use one of these little interviews made in the same fashion we did in 2021 in the same place, namely at the checkpoint that crosses into the Muscovy-supported so-called Pridnestrovian Moldovan Republic.
Не знаю, за всех не могу сказать. Я хочу быть в Европе.
This version of the narrative was also all too present in the mainstream media, especially between May the 21st, the day of the pro-EU manifestation, and all the way up to June the 1st, the day of the European Political Community Summit. Both contained almost no lies and very few exaggerations, but both failed to make the context available, at least beyond the usual platitudes. And the context is this: Moldova is in election season. It started with the local elections in Gagauzia on April the 30th and May the 14th, when, during the campaign, a bunch of Russian officials were politely told to go nahui. Prior to that, pro-Russian parties organized a protest on May the 7th as well, and a few dubious gatherings in Comrad. Next round of elections is in autumn, when the rest of Moldova holds local elections. Of course, key to these will be the races in Bălți and the capital city Chișinău. Older subscribers may remember from the Moldova series what a shit show was the snap election for the mayor's office in Bălți. Well, get ready for some more of that, as the incumbent Russian military man, Comrade Grigorishin, has kinda, like I predicted he will, transformed. He will now run for a party that is less Russophilic. He holds meetings with mayors from Romania and even expressed mild regret for the fact that his business in Ukraine in 2014 were used as cover to train separatist fighters in the Donbass, a fact which was, of course, a conspiracy theory until about 4 years ago. Meanwhile, in the capital city, at stake is to keep the current mayor busy with local politics, because the current mayor is perhaps the only one on the left that could realistically unseat President Sandu. So in this environment, all of this, the pro-EU marches, the Soviet flag marches, the impromptu concerts, all of that ought to be regarded from a campaign lens. The parliamentary elections are 2 years from now, so there is little concern for the regime on how the ruling party is polling. Yes, PAS is polling terribly, but it has just enough justifiable context to eschew any serious backlash. So once we factor in this context, suddenly the news from Moldova doesn't look that tense anymore, does it? And as I was saying in the intro, there are in fact good news. 2 years ago, during the so-called pandemic, the commies alone were able to mobilize over 40,000 people for a political march, and I showed that during the Moldova series at the time. Today, two pro-Russian parties barely got 20,000 to show up, and I'm being generous with the figure. In 2021, the leaders didn't have to bring their kids, nephews, and their kids' friends and pay them to be there in order to boost the youth-looking faces and boost the numbers overall. Today, they had to do just that. In 2021, they didn't have to hide their buses and avoid being seen as bussing people in because it was still socially acceptable to do so. Today, they had to do that too because this way of doing things is less kosher, at least in the capital city. The level of disapproval from random people passing by their march was also far higher in 23 than it was 2 years ago. And again, the sheer numbers. The pro-Muscovite circles have been consistently losing steam in their ability to mobilize for such projects. Because you see, a paid trip to the capital city is part of the package mayors use to buy votes. I know, I'm not supposed to say that, but it's true. And it's a tried and tested method, and it only stops working when overall economic conditions improve or when a bigger threat emerges. And over the last 2 years, economic conditions in Moldova not only did not improve, but are objectively worse than they were in June of 2021. So, in theory, this tactic should work better. And that's why they keep trying it. The problem for the left, which, again, friendly reminder, the left in Moldovan context means pro-Russia. So the problem for the left is that the bigger threat factor ruins the plans. In the absence of the war in Ukraine, the left would cruise to a resounding victory now. But it doesn't, because it can't, and their friend Putin is partly to blame. The rest of the blame is local factors, such as the fact that the Moldovan left hasn't been aspirational in over a decade, and while you can find the odd one out who wishes for the good old days of the USSR, and is also not on average age deceased, the fact of the matter is that the Moldovan left, as we know it today, has no aspirational story. Now that doesn't mean it won't reinvent itself. It will, even if that will mean ditching Russism altogether. The politicians will still want to win elections, and just as former hardliners who wanted a big wall on the border with Romania suddenly now speak Romanian in public and sign new collaboration agreements with Romanian authorities, so will others metamorphose into something else. In 2022, Moldova was given candidate status to the Европейский Союз, and in May it was promised that if all goes well, the country will join by 2030. Now, I don't think that's a good idea, but let's assume it all goes according to the plan. By 2030, the Moldovan left will look very different from the one of today. Heck, it already looks different from the one of 2021. In 2021, the mayor of the capital city wouldn't have hesitated to march alongside these vatniks. Today, he kept a very long distance from this shit show. So in many ways, treat this video and the older ones about Moldova as historical document. They'll probably be funnier 5 or 7 years from now. Anyway, so to sum up, it's election season in Moldova, and that's the lens through which news from this country should be interpreted for the next several months. And now watch how a significant chunk of commentators end up misinterpreting the news from Moldova for the remainder of the summer and the onset of the autumn. It will be fun. That's all I had to say. I shall go back to editing the videos on Central Asia. Don't forget to send me to the killing fields. Thanks for watching, and I will see you all soon on the Freedom Alternative.